She's a lifestyle and functional medicine GP with 25 years of experience working in the NHS. Susanna calls her own messy journey from breakdown to healing, combines this with a professional and academic knowledge of psychological trauma to both train wellness professionals to become trauma-informed and support others to heal. As a coach herself, Susanna also works with individuals and groups to recognize the physical, emotional, and behavioral impacts of psychological trauma. When we can validate our experience, we can empower others to liberate others and ourselves from the shackles of psychological trauma and find a path to wholeness. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Susanna Petch.
8 years ago, I completely lost my mind, and I came dangerously close to losing my life. What saved my life was understanding that my devastating symptoms were as a result of psychological trauma. It wasn't a quick realization. I had to travel through hell and back to get that full understanding. On the outside, everything looked completely fine. I was a wife, still am, and a mum, hung out with friends, even had a mortgage. And what will seem ironic once you hear my story is that I'm a doctor, a GP in fact, and have always had a fascination with mental health and that mind-body connection. I've even set up mental health services in this country, in Australia, even been a commissioner for mental health. But behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. The effort it took to function every day was so hard and something I hid from everyone around me. Even my husband didn't know the full extent of it. And that effort, that struggle was becoming harder day by day until everything completely fell apart. One cold, damp, grey January morning, you know those days where it never actually gets light, I got up, got myself ready for work, was at the surgery for 7:30 to start seeing patients early. By 9 o'clock, I was a snivelling, sobbing heap in the corner of the consulting room. My colleague, hearing my distress, came rushing in from next door, and I was sent home for 2 weeks. I was unable to work for 6 months. The months leading up to this breakdown, I had started to experience familiar symptoms that I was used to having experienced throughout my adult life, on and off. Feeling of low mood, feeling suicidal on and off, that kind of sense of rage, but worrying about everything, distrusting people around me, complete lack of self-worth, and a kind of disconnection that I couldn't really be in touch with people or myself around me. But I'd seen so many GPs, therapists, even a psychiatry throughout my adult life, and they'd all told me it was depression. So I did what I had done so many times previously, took myself off to my GP, started antidepressants again, and found a counsellor. But this counsellor was different, and she questioned the diagnosis of depression. And one session, when I found myself recounting a traumatic experience of rape I'd experienced in my early 20s, she looked at me with compassion and gently said, "Susanna, I think you might have post-traumatic stress disorder." I'll be honest, I did look at her and say, "Do you know who I am? I mean, this is my job, right?" "Susanna, I think it's best if you don't go away and read up about this, but come back next week and we'll discuss it together." So obviously I went home and Googled everything I could about post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD, and I came across a term I'd never heard before, complex PTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I found out that this can develop as a result of repeated or sustained trauma over a period of time, as opposed to a one-off event which can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. And reading about complex PTSD was literally like reading about my life. So I did what any normal person would do and shoved down any thoughts, feelings, and emotions that came up as a result of this into a box and pushed it to the back of my mind and pretended as if nothing had happened. And carried on making dinner, putting my kids to bed, got myself ready for work. And the following morning was at work, 7:30, And as you know by now, I didn't make it past 9. The weeks and months that followed were a living hell. I had such bizarre and weird symptoms, I really thought I'd completely lost my mind and thought the only option was actually to end my life. In fact, I thought that would be the best thing for everybody around me. Fortunately, the counsellor I'd seen encouraged me to see a therapist who specialised in trauma, and seeing her, especially that first appointment, was life-changing. She went through all of these different bizarre symptoms, just listing them, saying, have you experienced this? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you ever noticed this? Uh-huh. And what about this? Yeah, mm-hmm. And she normalised everything in the context of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Working with her, I came to understand that the multiple sexual traumas I'd experienced as a young adult, together with training and working in the toxic system that is the NHS, that's a story for another day, had all contributed to me becoming so devastatingly unwell. I cannot even begin to express the relief I felt to understand that what I was feeling were entirely normal responses to abnormal situations that I'd found myself in, but that I'd got stuck and I needed help to get through that. That relief, however, very quickly turned to incandescent rage. 1, how come I didn't know about this as a medical student or as a doctor? How come I not learned about this in my years of training? And 2, how come so many healthcare professionals had misdiagnosed me for over 2 decades? And then 3, that realization of how many people I had misdiagnosed and mistreated because of my lack of knowledge. That frustration drove me to try and find out more, and I ended up enrolling in a master's in psychological trauma just to try and comprehend what was going on in my own brain and body. And it opened up a whole world that I didn't know about, of scientific research, proof, evidence, publications, books about psychological trauma, what it is, what causes it, how to recognize it, what impact it has, and importantly, how you can heal from it. And this bit was really crucial for me because I, like most people with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, find talking therapy, although helpful, was just not enough. I learnt how psychological trauma impacts our nervous systems, causes inflammation throughout the brain and body, and how when we use lifestyle interventions and body work and tap into our creativity, this can create the environment for our brains and body to do its thing, to heal, without needing to talk about the trauma itself. The impacts of trauma are just so wide-reaching. It doesn't just impact our mental health, but also our physical health, something that the medical profession doesn't acknowledge yet. But it also impacts our relationships, personal and professional. And I know with this knowledge and understanding, I now have much more joyous and fulfilling relationships, personally, professionally. I'm a better mum, and I'm definitely a better clinician. I just want to pause and acknowledge my privilege. I know that the provision for treating people with psychological trauma in the NHS is utterly dire. What I was offered was just woefully inadequate. And I am so lucky that I had the resources to pay for that initial counsellor, pay for the trauma therapist, pay to study, and that I had a husband who supported me. And when I was very unwell, frequently had to take days off work just to ensure that I stayed alive. I know without his support or those resources, there is no way that I would be standing here in front of you today. Sadly, though, my story is not uncommon. In this country, 27% of women and nearly 6% of men experience serious sexual assault or rape in adulthood. And that's only one cause of psychological trauma. There are so many more. But if we take a truly trauma-informed approach, if we actually acknowledge it, recognize it, validate people's experience, then we can do something about it. And there's so much that we can do. And this is now my purpose, to share this understanding wider, to help people understand that this possibility of healing is open to everybody. But I can't do this alone. I need your help. I hope that hearing my story has been the spark to ignite curiosity in you, that you want to find out more about psychological trauma and its impacts, so that you in turn can empower others. Because I know that when we come together, we really can create a trauma-informed world. Thank you.